Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the Sony Cybershot DSC-RX100 Mark III on the left and the RX100 Mark II on the right. The Mark II launched last year and, in my opinion, was a very solid update, but certainly not a replacement to the original RX100, which changed the expectation and standard that every consumer could have for the performance of a pocket-friendly point-and-shoot camera, because it paired a 1-inch sensor, which is traditionally far larger than anything else in the point-and-shoot business, with a very respectable piece of Carl Zeiss glass that was in fact fast, unlike most point-and-shoot cameras in its class. The Mark II that we're looking at here took that original $650 price point up to $750 and gave us some basic modernization like Wi-Fi, NFC, as well as a tilting LCD screen. The original Mark I had a fixed display. The inclusion of a hot shoe for optional accessories like a flash or microphone, as well as a $450 OLED EVF. So the Mark II was a definite improvement. The only thing internally, though, under the hood that was changed, the sensor being identical to the original one in the Mark I, switched over from a front illumination to a backside illumination. And by going with that rear illumination, it did get a slight gain in performance when it came to low light capabilities. In terms of everything else, though, the Wi-Fi, NFC, tilting screen, and hot shoe really summed up what you were paying for the extra $100 by buying into this update, I will say, to the Mark I, because again, Sony has maintained all of the RX100s. They have not actually dubbed any of these an actual replacement. So it's really more a matter of what your budget is and the fact that all three cameras do offer a different feature set, but the core guts, the important parts, the actual sensor and lens combination and overall performance is really stellar across all three generations. Now, the Mark III, on the other hand, in my opinion, really is the true update to the original Mark I, and that's because not only does it have everything that the Mark III has, although they did opt out of the multi-interface shoe, but Sony has now also incorporated electronic viewfinder, something that, like many of the updates that the Mark II brought, were essentially wish list type things from consumers. That's exactly what Sony granted here in the latest model. Now, the retail for this camera moved from $750 with the Mark II up to $800, so a $50 price increase for this latest generation. But what makes it unique is that even though it does still use the same sensor that you'll find in the Mark II, and yes, it is back illuminated like the Mark II, so exactly the same sensor, Sony has also done more, though, here. They've given you a new piece of Carl Zeiss glass. They've given up some focal range in exchange for a faster piece of glass. So we've got an f1.8 to f2.8 aperture across the 24 to 70 millimeter lens that is built in or fixed to this pocket point and shoot camera, whereas here we had a 28 to 100 millimeter piece of glass that was f1.8 to 4.9. So faster glass, shorter range, but that's not it. We also now have, and this is really a matter of personal need and whether or not you care about having the ability to shoot a selfie, but we now do have a fully 180 degree rotation from the LCD display. So a selfie is possible. Now, for someone like me who's in need of shooting a selfie, I've been doing that blind for many, many years. But it is nice to have. I certainly wouldn't necessarily want to spend the extra money, but for some of you, that will be a defining characteristic of what makes the Mark III unique. But I think the entire feature set, specifically the new glass and viewfinder, really is what sets this camera apart. And by the way, the viewfinder itself is actually also T-star coated, which means that in bright sunlight, even though you don't have a traditional eye cup here, you still do get I try to bring that up there. It's not going to actually pick it up. You still do get, I won't say a glare-free experience, but a very solid one that is surprisingly good and will make all of you out there that are considering replacing that digital SLR, or at least not taking it on the trip simply because you'd rather enjoy the trip than carry around your gear, it's going to make you feel very happy that you got it. So in my opinion right now, the Mark III, even though it has the same sensor as the Mark II, and it's significantly more expensive considering now, let's talk about real world pricing today, the Mark II on the right is $650 retail. Maybe you'll be able to see it at even lower price points. Of course, it's only getting older. The Mark III at $800 still firm because the camera just launched. So there is a significant difference in price if you don't care about the faster glass, which in many ways I think that even though you don't have the brighter glass on the Mark II, there are many consumers that would prefer to have the focal range. So that's also what again reaffirms the fact that the Mark II and Mark III really aren't competing with one another as much as you might think between the pricing and difference in capabilities. I know that while there are many consumers that will absolutely demand that viewfinder because they need reading glasses, and shooting on a screen like this without reading glasses is relatively impossible, but many of you already are doing that, so that's another story altogether. But then the viewfinder is really going to be the feature you absolutely must have. But overall, all of the enhancements they've put together with the Mark III really are a relative bargain when you think about that the retail price at least has only gone up by $50. Fair, in my opinion. Still very expensive, no question about it, but when you take into account that this camera really can take on some, I would say, interchangeable lens cameras easily, that's an impressive feat, especially the fact that it now does have a built-in viewfinder that even many interchangeable lens cameras do not, and a high-quality one at that. This is the same OLED viewfinder you'll find in the RX10 that is still retailing for $1,300. As well as, I believe it's the same viewfinder in the A6000. The A6000 is a less expensive camera, but a completely different beast. With regard to software, these are identical. In terms of body, very, very similar. I will speak to battery life because battery life is better. That is in favor of the Mark II, and that's because the Mark II does not have that OLED viewfinder. Had it, then we'd be looking at a fair comparison, I believe, with that in mind. Maybe Sony will update the software. Right now, there seems to be, at least from what I've seen or read as well, an issue with regard to the camera always at least drawing power to the viewfinder. So that may be an issue. Again, that's speculation. Maybe there will be an update to actually turn off power to the viewfinder, because that seems to be the true difference in what would make the Mark III sip more juice than the Mark II or, of course, the Mark I before it. But in terms of the actual layout, the hot shoe is gone. The flash I do prefer over here on the Mark III. It's just better positioned, and in my opinion actually functions better in real world performance. I also want to point out, before I continue to just go around the body, video quality, because that isn't something I mentioned, and that's critical. In fact, it's one of the most important features here. The Mark II had the exact same video quality as the original Mark I. You're looking at 1080p, 60p in AVC HD. That's the highest quality video you're going to capture with the Mark I or Mark II, and that's going to be at 28 megabits per second. In the brand new Mark III, because we've got the Beyond's X processor, which is a later generation processor, the current one in all of Sony's flagship digital imaging devices, from $2,500 interchangeable lens cameras down to devices like this and other point and shoots in their lineup, like the HX400V that I've covered, you are getting something you have not seen Sony offer in any other camera other than what I'm filming on now, which is xavc-s video rather than just AVC HD, and the bit rate there is 50 megabits per second. So not quite a double in video quality, but if you take a look at some of my video samples, which I will include because I do have video samples for both of these cameras, you will very quickly see that video is far superior on the Mark III. It's just inherent, and it's because we're getting a direct readout of the sensor as well as a lot more information. So it's cleaner video, higher quality video, just short of really Sony unlocking the 4K kingdom eventually, hopefully in the Mark IV, I would assume, or at least in the successor to the RX10. But otherwise, handling very similar. And for those of you that watch my comparisons, you know I'm about going over all the details and what to expect. Clearly, if budget is your chief concern, the Mark II is the way to go. You may even want to consider the original Mark I. That's why I've kept it in the discussion throughout the course of this video. If I bring up the flash here, as I mentioned before, that now is in place where the hot shoe used to be, I just feel it's more flexible and it's where it belongs on the body in order to get a far more natural result. But a lot of consumers will miss this hot shoe because the quality of the Mark II really was something to be leveraged, especially in its form factor. And that is gone now on the Mark III. And that again reminds us why these are really more than just different price points, even though I said that they are different price points, because they do, again, represent different capabilities, even though they're all in the same form factor, the RX100 included. Because I think you can pick that up easily. I think the retail now is $500, somewhere around that, on sale any given day. So that is an incredible value if you don't care about the Wi-Fi, NFC, hot shoe, or swiveling, tilting LCD screen. But clearly there's just an evolution, maturation of the RX100 lineup across all three cameras. But everything the Mark III brings is just so compelling that if budget isn't an issue, I highly recommend going with it. Because it really does represent the best of everything that Sony's ever done in the RX100 lineup. With regard to the menu system and power up time, the battery is on its last legs here. Essentially, we're looking at the same menu system, and you can see it's going on me right now. But really, it is identical. The key difference, as it says battery exhausted, and I do have another battery here, so don't worry, I will throw it in. The key difference really is all about access to the Play Memory Store, because even though this camera had Wi-Fi and NFC, it did not have the ability to purchase applications. So that is something, in my opinion, that is definitely noteworthy for those of you that actually plan on buying any of Sony's applications. And there are some good ones. I think some are gimmicks, clearly, like anything else. Others happen to be useful, like the time-lapse app. Other people will prefer to use other methods. So it's really just a matter of what you plan to use more than anything else. I think that a lot of people won't care about that. So that's why, in many ways, it's a negligible difference, in my opinion. So I'm bringing up the menus just to, again, demonstrate that we're working with pretty much the exact same deal here as I accidentally start recording video. Let's go ahead and bring up this display. And instantly you see the difference in terms of where the actual displays are going to sit when you're actually bringing them up. I mean, this is because we've got that full 180 degrees of rotation with the Mark III, whereas with the Mark II, we simply do not, and that's why the screen is at a fixed position in the center when actually positioned as it is right now. So clear design differences. By the way, the Mark III is a heavier camera, no surprise considering it packs quite a bit more tech inside it with that viewfinder inside it. That already in itself bumped it up, but it's really a marginal difference, and part of that is also that we've got that new lens on the Mark III as well. But in terms of menus, you can see really fairly identical. This does have a screen protector on it right now, for those of you wondering why there's glare. It's picking up the lights. If I move it forward there, should dissipate somewhat. No screen protector there, so that's the Sony screen protector picking up the light. So in fairness to the camera itself, but the menus are pretty much identical, and that's really not going to be the defining characteristic for either of these devices, because in that department they both are just fantastic. When it comes to the menu system, the RX100 is where Sony got it right for the first time and said, we're going to bring the alpha style menus to the point and shoot world, since we're bringing a alpha price to the point and shoot world. So that's what you see happening here, and they've continued to do this across all of their RX branded cameras, and are starting to really standardize this because it's simpler for consumers. They've got good feedback, and for good reason. It gives you quick access to everything you could possibly want access to, unlike some of the previous menu systems, which were more about aesthetic than actual productivity, and really didn't lend themselves. I mean, I'm really referring to the NEX lineup. That was a big drawback, but that's a tangent all on a whole nother level that has nothing to do with what we're looking at here. But Sony just has done a nice job with both of these cameras, and I can assure you, whichever you go with, you will not be disappointed. But when it comes to handling, they're pretty much the same. But what you see me going through right now with the display, that's just one of those things where it's clearly a more polished device, the Mark III, but you're paying for it, a substantial ransom at that, especially when you consider that the picture and video quality, even though I mentioned you're only getting 28 megabits here on the right and in the original Mark I, is still going to kill everything else out there that's in this class. Keep in mind, there still is no competing product out there. There at least are some on the horizon, but if you need a camera today or anytime this summer, these are still the best point-and-shoot options that you're going to be able to fit in a pocket, especially if you want to forget about the gear bag or complement it with a second device, which is what I think both of these are really great at doing. In fact, they're ideal. 10 frames per second in terms of speed, and that's what you can get in terms of continuous autofocus. That's another story. That's going to be a locked autofocus there at 10 frames. But it's just really a matter of, again, as I've said over and over again, do you want to spend the extra cash to get that OLED viewfinder as well as that brand new lens? To me, the self-portrait really isn't going to be the reason for the majority of users out there to want to upgrade from the Mark I or Mark II, clearly, or to even justify that price, because that's just an improvement. The OLED viewfinder, though, for many of you, is the difference between this camera being a functional replacement for a digital SLR. And if you think I'm crazy saying that, it's because you just haven't seen the results that the RX100 lineup puts out. Because when you compare it to a lot of APS-C cameras, it can hang. And that's because of that sensor lens pairing. It's something Sony has been very good at, unlike any other manufacturer. The RX1 is the best example, and of course the RX1R. Hopefully those get updates. There have been lots of rumors. But neither of these cameras, as I've mentioned, is going to disappoint. Some people will say these are closer to being compact, but the fact is they do fit in the pocket. And compact form factor cameras simply do not. You can see on the back side they really didn't change anything. Basically all of the buttons in the same location in terms of menu, the function, your programmable, your playback. The grip is identical. And speaking of grip, that's probably my biggest critique with the entire RX100 lineup. The fact that without the optional grip that you see on both of these cameras right now, you really just don't have anything to hold on to other than the bottom of the camera itself. So it doesn't lend itself to the most natural shooting experience, but when you take into account the what you're actually getting with regard to image and video quality, that's why so many people are willing to overlook it, because quite frankly, even Sony overlooked it, and that's why it took them until the RX100 Mark II to actually make the optional accessory that you see on it right now, and then come out with a third one that is compatible with all of them. I also want to point out that the Mark II, it was the first, as I said, to have Wi-Fi and NFC. The NFC contact point was on the bottom of the camera. It has been relocated. The contact point now on the Mark III has been moved to the left-hand side. I believe this is a better position. It's a matter of personal preference, but it just, to me, should be relatively obvious why it's better to have it on the side than on the bottom. The camera might be on a tripod, just one thought. But either way, this is really just a matter of pricing, as I've said, and really some of you may not want to give up the hot shoe in the focal range. I know I personally, it was a tough decision for me, but at the end of the day, for me, the RX100, what it's always represented from day one and still to this day it's all about, is truly offering the best camera you can get in your pocket. Because as I always say, the best camera is the one that you have with you, that travels with you, because so many people rely on their phones, which I find sad, but for many, that's all they really need. If you want more, this is it. And the Mark III is now really the best representation, the actual standard of achieving exactly that, the best image quality, both in still and video, that you're going to be able to put in your pocket without changing your lifestyle, really, in order to capture moments that traditionally would require gear rather than a pocketable camera. So I think the Mark III has all the right compromise, and by that I mean very little compromise, but it's got a price point to match its performance, no question about it. Some consumers will not be in love with the battery life compared to what they were used to with the Mark I or Mark II, but I think overall, again, the Mark III just embodies everything that the original Mark I was all about. The best camera that not only money can afford, but that can fit in your pocket. The Mark II, an incredible value now with that reduced price. It's only going to get lower. The same applies to the Mark I. So hopefully this video helped all of you that were curious about what the Mark II versus Mark III entire structured argument is all about, and what each camera has to offer. Remember, you're still looking at that same 1-inch 20 megapixel backlit sensor in both of these cameras, and that's really what makes this comparison more valid than anything, in my opinion. That's something that even the Mark I and Mark II did not share in common, and yet many found it to be negligible. So here it's even money on that. But the lens, of course, is where the Mark III, besides the viewfinder and everything I've mentioned, the tilting screen, that's where that becomes a game changer all over again, much like the original Mark I. So I hope this helped all of you that are trying to figure out whether you should purchase the Mark II or the Mark III, or make that move to upgrade. I would say if you've been enjoying the Mark I and the Mark III appeals to you, it's got everything that you had hoped for in the original generation, go ahead and jump on it. You won't regret it in any way. On the other hand, if you own the Mark II and are happy with it, I don't really see a reason to move to the brand new Mark III unless you absolutely require that viewfinder, because that's really the most significant thing. Yes, the glass is as well, but the performance from the Mark II and Mark I still will outclass everything other than the Mark III. And as I've said, some of you will not want to give up that hot shoe or extra range, because both of those features really just represent flexibility that has been part of the compromise of the brand new Mark III. So I hope this helped all of you, as I've said over and over again, and both are great cameras. I can completely endorse them in terms of being a very satisfying experience. You're not going to walk away disappointed with either product, but the Mark III definitely is the better and more expensive camera in this comparison. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.